So hello, just want to do a quick review of a book by Anjali. It's Yoga as Embodied Resistance. First of all, let's look at the structure of the book. So it's on the aesthetics, so it's a really nice paperback here that I've got. It's quite a thin book, as you can see. It's about 176 pages, I believe, minus the glossary and the index and all those things. It's really well written, and I think the audience in mind is people who have got a basic understanding of the key concepts of yoga. So maybe somebody who is a practitioner or even a yoga teacher, I would imagine. And it's maybe challenging some of those preconceptions that you would have as someone maybe who's been immersed in yoga for some time and has these ideas. I would say, there's a nice glossary at the back, so if you're new to yoga, you probably could get on very well with it because it's written very much in a colloquial way. It's not academic writing by any stretch, although it's not. There is academic rigor involved in researching this book, and that's on display too. So I would say, if you're completely new to yoga, you maybe want to read like a beginner's guide to yoga to start with, to give you an idea of just the key concepts. That would be really helpful, actually, because I think it would give you an idea of some of the things that are popularized in modern yoga, some concepts that are popularized, which Anjali will then go ahead and challenge within this book. So for me, this is a really key book. I think it should be something that would be included or looked at within yoga teacher trainings moving forward, particularly within the West, because I think some of these concepts have been, solidified within our psyche as practitioners of yoga, and Anjali does a really good job of challenging them. So what are those kind of things? Well, first of all, again going back to the structure, one of the things I like about this book is that it's told from the perspective of several women who are practitioners of yoga, key practitioners, key figures within the yoga world, if you like. From that perspective, it's taken away this idea of yoga being taught largely by men. If you think about some of the people who come over to teach yoga, in the West, people maybe who set up like the Shivananda yoga school, some of these key traditional yoga schools, or integral yoga, or even Iyengar, those kind of things, always taught by men, often by Brahmin men. That's kind of like one of the castes within India, one of the privileged castes. And Anjali's key point is that then brings in an element of casteism to the yoga that we're practicing in the West. And, a lot of the things that were maybe taken as part of yoga, as part of our practice, are actually hangovers from some of those casteist concepts. And this even goes, and this one challenged me a little bit, because I'm vegan. I'm vegan for animal rights, reasons. But a lot of people would see vegetarianism in particular and veganism as part of the practice of yoga. And one of the things Anjali's saying is that actually is a hangover from casteism, where in India, vegetarianism can be weaponized. You see some of these kind of like cow protection groups and charities that have been set up. And, I'm not saying, I don't know enough to say, as to whether all of them have got an agenda of casteism, but some of them certainly are set up in a kind of communitarian kind of agenda, where it's against maybe people who are Muslim in the area who do eat meat, and so it's just to be aware of those kind of cultural elements in our modern yoga, which we maybe kind of see from a different perspective. Anjali's given the background to some of this, so that we're knowledgeable about why these things have come into modern yoga, the background to them, and whatever lens we put on them now, it's important for us to know just in the past where they've come from. Another one is Sanskrit, and the use of the Sanskrit language. And I think, I've been quite guilty of when I was teaching yoga of um, being quite protective and putting a certain spin on use of Sanskrit within yoga. And Anjali challenges that within the book. Now, she's not saying we should drop Sanskrit. She says that she enjoys bhajans and different things, mantras and things herself. But she's suggesting that there's an element, obviously, of casteism within the use of Sanskrit. And we often talk about Sanskrit being, in the West, I think, being the language of yoga. And Anjali very much challenges that and gives a really good history or context for the use of Sanskrit and how that came into play. So there's a couple of things. What I really like is that Anjali kind of has a summary of the key points she makes at each chapter. Now, each chapter is written from the perspective of, as I say, a female yoga practitioner within history, often those who've maybe been sidelined. And she's trying to bring, as it says, that kind of feminist lens back in terms of, looking at the history of yoga and some of the key people who are practicing yoga. Now, what she isn't trying to do, what she's very keen to highlight that she's not trying to do, she's not trying to put our liberal values from 2026, if you like, into the past and onto some of these characters. She's not trying to do that. She's speaking about them from the perspective of their time. So it's not an attempt to rewrite history in any way or to kind of represent some people within history as being representative of things that they wouldn't have been representative of in their time. So I think that's really good. That she's keen not to do that. Other things just to talk about is it's maybe re-examining the roots of modern yoga through, and this is one of the things I really liked about the book, through this non-sectarian lens. And yet it's not somebody from the West doing this. Anjali herself grew up in India and has got that lived experience she can speak to. And that's very unique within books of this nature. You often find, or I've often found, that a lot of these books are written by people from the West, academics like James Mallinson or Mark Singleton, maybe who would, their perspective could be kind of like set aside in some regards as maybe like, coming in and looking at a culture which they don't maybe necessarily have as much lived experience to kind of understand. And I don't think you can say that about Anjali. I think she obviously has lived and grown up in India and speaks very fondly of those memories and of that experience, but also isn't afraid to challenge things from that perspective as well. And I think it makes this a very unique book, and one that I think it's not the kind of book that it's easy to come by. Not very many books like this exist. I think from this very unique perspective that Anjali has. There are a couple that I have come across, and I will mention those in the conclusion as things maybe the books to look at if you want to take this further. But yeah, just to say I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed just some of the challenges that the book puts out. The concept is yoga Hindu, the use of Sanskrit, the politicize, if I can say that word properly, politicization of yoga. She brings in obviously the concept of Hindutva. I can't even say that word either. Hindu nationalism, and how that kind of plays into the presentation of yoga, even in the West. And I think it's just really eye-opening, some of these things that you look at. I really reflect on my experience growing up in Northern Ireland, and how it was difficult to kind of take seriously the perspective of people who come in to try and understand or comment on the situation in Northern Ireland without actually having the lived experience of living there. And I've often been aware of that when reading critiques of yoga from academics who are maybe based in the UK or the US or whatever, that there is always that disconnect. And I think Anjali, just I think she fills that gap really well. I think in terms of this kind of literature. So yeah, I would really recommend this book. Other books I would suggest that if you really like this and want to read a little bit more, a couple that I've found really good, again from having that lived experience of somebody who lives in India, is Skyclad. That's a book by Mukunda Rao. I don't think there's any relation there. Maybe there is. And Mukunda basically tells his story in more detail of one of the characters that we meet in this book, that being Aka Mahadevi. I'm really butchering these Sanskrit terms, or these names. And Aka was like a female Shaivite in the south, I think in Tamil Nadu, around that, who basically was just really challenged some of the gender norms around what it meant to be a practitioner in that day. And in another book by Mukunda Rao was Belief and Beyond, where he really challenges some of the notions that are in terms of Vedanta and Advaita that he's grown up with, and Hinduism in general. And he really basically reestablishes some of those things for himself in a way that feels more appropriate for him, having studied and thought and kind of lived with some of those concepts. And I find it really good. I really enjoyed it. Another one is I've maybe talked about is The Roots of Yoga by James Mallinson and Mark Singleton. Again, just that proviso that these are people maybe who've had a lot of experience in India and studying and working there, and I know both are practitioners. James Mallinson himself is initiated into like a Vaish, a kind of tantric lineage, and so he spent a lot of time in India, but it's still that lens from outside looking in, and I think that's where this book really goes beyond, I think, some of those things. And also I think James Mallinson and Mark Singleton are academics, whereas whilst Anjali is definitely an academic, this book is written in a more colloquial way, with a different audience in mind. So yeah, wonderful book. I really recommend it, especially if you're a yoga teacher or a yoga practitioner. This is a wonderful book to kind of to maybe challenge some of the notions that you've inherited through a traditional yoga teacher training, even a Western-based one, especially a Western-based one, I believe. So yeah, highly recommended.